Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass. Thank you for watching this Ag Forecast, brought to you by Agrible, the makers of Morning Farm Report. Our software gives growers the insights to make the best decisions possible about their operations. And we have even more insights to offer now with our new Spray Smart Historic. This upgrade to your Morning Farm Report account gives you field-specific data including wind speed and direction, relative humidity, temperature, wind gusts, and dew points for your fields in your account. The report includes a table that contains the hourly observations from May 31st, 2017 to the date the report is completed. Email us at drift@agrible.com to get started. Well, I wanted to take a step back and look at this month of July. So what we're looking at here is July 1st through 29th temperature anomalies all put together. What we can see is the result of the flow patterns we saw throughout the month of July. Essentially, with the kind of meandering position of the large ridge out west, we see most of our heat concentrated from basically Idaho, getting into parts of Montana, and then of course the Dakotas. We see a warm bias that snakes down through parts of the western Corn Belt, getting into parts of Illinois. But where we had a broad trough for quite a few of the days throughout the month and quite a bit of precipitation as well, we see these cooler anomalies. And this is important to see because we know that historically, cool Julys are correlated with higher yields. Let's take a look at precipitation. Here's a map that I created early in the morning on Sunday, and what this shows you is the last 30 days in terms of the percent of normal precipitation. We can see again the effects of that ridge. Notice the really wet conditions we had across the eastern part of the Corn Belt, getting back into northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, and parts of eastern Iowa. But basically, wherever that flow pattern established itself, on one side of that northwest flow, we had the rain. On the other side, we had drier conditions. So you can see that parts of central Illinois getting over into St. Louis area, back into northern Missouri, the western half of Iowa, some pockets in Minnesota, but really not too much stress here. But of course, only hit or miss showers and storms in the Dakotas. Don't forget, even though we had some major storms that slammed into parts of Nebraska toward the end of the month, much of Nebraska spent the month of July quite dry, and Kansas has actually been quite dry as well. So when you put all this in aggregate, it kind of lets you get this picture of what July looks like and what this might do to our corn yields. And I just want you to keep this in the back of your mind as we go through the rest of this forecast. Well, over the last 48 hours, so this is basically our weekend, we saw the dominance of a large area of higher atmospheric pressure that was setting up right over Illinois on Sunday night when I was making this video. It was along its periphery that we saw most of our showers and storms. In fact, some big-time shower and thunderstorm activity in parts of the panhandles of Oklahoma and Texas, getting over to New Mexico, and then southeastern Colorado. And some of the storms stretched up into parts of Nebraska and even into the Dakotas as well. So this spelled pretty good rainfall for some of those very dry fields across parts of the country that were experiencing some drought. Well, it is this area of higher atmospheric pressure that's going to occupy the center part of our Corn Belt for the next few days as we get into this new week as well, keeping this region relatively dry. But what I want to show you is this. This is a forecast produced by the NAM model, and it was initialized late in the evening on Sunday and runs us out through the beginning part of this week. So we're going to see the precipitation forecast through the little early part of Thursday. Now, what I see when we watch this, and I'll pause it here after it gets through one more time. Here we go. Is that to begin the week on Monday, we really are still dominated by that big area of higher atmospheric pressure. There's a tropical disturbance that's moving through southern tip of Florida, so they're going to get lots and lots of rain down here. In fact, we're going to see quite a bit of precipitation over the next 5 to 7 days right here along the Gulf Coast. We're also going to see, because of the flow around that high pressure center, quite a bit of shower and thunderstorm activity still lingering in the beginning part of our week in that same area that was wet over the weekend. But watch this. As we step forward, by the time Monday finishes up, we still see some, the dominance of that higher atmospheric pressure. But what I want you to see is as we get into Tuesday, here's Tuesday, get into Tuesday night, by the time we get into Wednesday, early Wednesday morning, see a very interesting thing that I've not seen for a long time across the Corn Belt, taking us all the way back really until May. And that is the emergence of a legitimate low pressure system. All summer long, we've seen northwest flow, we've seen lots of thunderstorms, but we really lacked well-developed, well-organized low-pressure systems because of the dominance of that ridge. But look at this. We have right here, moving across parts of the Dakotas and then into Minnesota and Wisconsin, a low-pressure center with a cold front that will be trailing with a warm front off to the east. And this will be a strong, kind of focused area of lift in the atmosphere, producing quite a bit of showers and storms. And why I'm bringing this up is because that is going to be quite a shift in the pattern, hitting a region that's been very, very dry. This is what's causing it. Here's the flow of the atmosphere by the time we get into the 3rd of August. You see, we have a huge ridge out west, and that's going to allow for some really strong flow to kind of move up the west coast of the United States, bringing in some very, very warm temperatures. But notice this, that huge ridge, because it is pinched between the trough that's sitting in the Gulf of Alaska and the broader trough that's sitting in the near the Hudson, is going to allow for a deep trough to kind of push through most of the Corn Belt. So we're going to really get through the first week of this new month here relatively cool across the Corn Belt, but it is basically the flow through this trough here that is going to initiate the development of that low pressure system that's going to move into the Great Lakes by the time we get into the 3rd and 4th of August. And so this is a very interesting event. And why I bring this up is because we can look at our most recent drought monitor. We'll get a new one of these on Thursday. And what it shows you here is that, this region up here in parts of Montana and the Dakotas, we're talking D2 through D4 stage drought. And this system is going to come right through this area, bringing in some precip. In fact, here's what it looks like. Here's your 10-day precipitation forecast by the European model, which has been recently, and actually for a lot of times this summer, outperforming everything else we kind of have here in the U.S. You can see the path of that system going through parts of the Dakotas, getting into Minnesota. Now, Minnesota doesn't necessarily need this much heavy precipitation. In fact, the crop in Minnesota looks pretty good unless you were damaged by a lot of those severe thunderstorms earlier in the season. But you can see we're bringing rain to places that have been quite dry. Also, check this out. Kansas, Nebraska getting a pretty healthy dose of precip here as well. There is some uncertainty about what's going to be happening across parts of Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana, and getting back over toward Arkansas, parts of Kentucky and Tennessee. We got to watch this area in here closely. It'll be dominated by that high pressure system for the beginning of the week. And because this system skirts to the north, we may be leaving this area dry to start as we get into the end of the week as well. But I'll keep a close eye on this and update you again on Thursday as to what we're expecting in this part of the Corn Belt. But overall, this is a good picture for those folks that are really that have really been hit hard by the drought in the Dakotas and in parts of Nebraska and Kansas. Now, let's talk about this long-term flow pattern. Let me take you all the way to Saturday, the 5th of August. I want to show you what the major drivers are of the flow pattern and discuss some things we have to be watching. It's been the Gulf of Alaska and the trough that's been sitting over the Hudson that have really helped pinch the ridge out west. And it's going to do that again throughout this first week of August. And again, that gives us northwest flow and brings that cooler air into much of the Corn Belt. But with that pattern, I am starting to see that there is some ensemble agreement. What that basically means is when we run the models multiple times and try to get different solutions, if they agree on an overall pattern, that gives us better confidence. Well, there's some ensemble agreement that this ridge tries to move into the center part of the country by the time we get into mid-August. It's not set in stone, but we're going to have to watch that closely. And it's also the time of year that I have to start really paying attention to the typhoons in the Western Pacific. This is a super typhoon right now that's spinning over here. And as this super typhoon kind of gets absorbed into what we call the mid-latitude flow here of the jet stream, it could produce a pretty large perturbation in that flow that could result in either a ridge system developing in the southern part of the country, or more than likely a big trough that comes through bringing a lot of rain. So this little feature here goes right up into the north and gets sucked back into the main flow, and it could cause some problems, 10 to 20 days away from present. So I'll be watching this very, very closely. Now, what I want to finish with is this. I showed you this forecast map on our update on Thursday, and I said, the U.S. model, the CFSV2, is different from the European in that it's calling for some potentially drier weather into this part of the country. It was basically seeing the trough ridge pattern evolving into a big, broad ridge through here, keeping the northwest flow over the northern plains and the Great Lakes. Now, what has happened since then is the CFSV2 has shifted to look like this. You see, the latest run comes in wet now, or at least near average to wet, for the I-states. So that's a pretty big shift in this model. And I'm going to be honest with you, because this model is bouncing around so much, I'm really losing some confidence in it as we get into the August forecast. Let's compare that, though, to what the European model's been saying. I showed you this last Thursday, and it basically showed much of the Corn Belt, near average to wetter than average. It did have this hint of some near average to maybe some drier than average conditions, but it has since evolved into this. And there's a little bit, wetter pattern that's bringing in for most of the Corn Belt. But that's not nearly as large of a shift in the total precipitation as we saw with the CFSV2. So right now, I'm leaning more toward using the European model. Now, let me tell you something. I don't just use models to do my forecasting. We use teleconnections, we use analogs, we use all these other techniques, including persistence. But when you come to kind of see what these models are suggesting, I just want to tell you that from the model perspective, the ECMWF seems to be a more consistent player at this point. Here's another case. I showed you this in terms of the CFSV2's temperature forecast. We saw that it was bringing that broader ridge through the center part of the country, and that's why it had some warmer temperatures here. But overall, not a really kind of devastatingly warm pattern for the Corn Belt. In fact, it was looking more cool for much of the Corn Belt. This is the latest run. Notice that it's really brought in the cooler anomalies where it's going to be wetter due to that southwestern monsoonal flow here. And we're potentially going to be seeing broader troughing for much of the month of August. And this now comes into much better alignment with what the European model said before and what the European model says now. So you can see why I'm tending to give more of my confidence to the long-range European forecasts simply because of the consistency that it's been producing. So basically, in sum here, what we're seeing is that the month of August has a better chance than not of carrying a near average to potentially cooler than average bias for the Corn Belt. We do have to watch mid-month for maybe a short duration heat event. But overall, the month of August is shaping up to be more favorable than not for our corn and soybean crops. One thing to consider, though, or really two things to consider. The first, August is normally a drier month, right? Our wetter months are in May, June, and July. So the month of August typically dries down. But the second thing to think about here is that the month of August 2017 currently does not look to carry the really, really wet bias that August 2016 carried, which produced that record bean crop. So, it's a lot to digest here, but I just want to give you my perspective on what these long-range models mean and how we can be using them in our long-term forecast. And so with that, I'll go ahead and wrap up this video. We hope you look forward to Agrible's next ag forecast on Thursday. To get morning farm report for your operations, complete with a daily email that shows you a snapshot of your field conditions each morning, go to morningfarmreport.com. Sign up for that free account. Full grower accounts are free if you sign up for our Sustainable Yield program or for our growers who work with AD merchandisers. Thank you and look forward to talking to you again on Thursday.